Kathleen Wiley, a Jungian Psychoanalyst in North Carolina, and I am here with Deborah Henson-Conant, a composer, a mentor, a coach, a creative. We both play the harp, and that's why we call this Jungian Harp. And almost every week we come together with you also, if you're live, to explore a question. And we always start with a question that's relevant for us, and we hope for you, not with answers. So this is episode number 175, and our topic today is shame on you and how to throw it off. So, Deborah, would you like to say something about why we decided to talk about shame and throwing it off?
Yeah, that's so funny because as you were saying that, I was like, oh, it sounds like we have an answer here, and we don't. Just something. So I can't, honestly, I can't remember why. Do you remember why?
Yeah, I think I remember why. You were talking about the power of pattern, which is the quarter that you're in with Hip Harp Academy, and also the idea of how have we been indoctrinated.
Right.
And one of the biggest indoctrinations a lot of people in our culture have is some version of I'm no good, I'm worthless, what I create has no value. Who am I to say that? What do you know? That kind of shaming, distorted attitude.
Yeah. So I was thinking about that because I was thinking yesterday I did in Harp Time Live, I was teaching from the power of pattern. So for the next 3 months, I am going to be teaching from this idea of the power of pattern, exploring it. And for the last 3 months, I was teaching from the idea of grounded expansion. So, looking at all the same things in life, but looking at them in a different way. And as I was researching that and looking at the power of pattern, and I was teaching the power of pattern to teach a particular song, and it was The Nightingale. I don't know how well we'll be able to hear it, but I have this song called The Nightingale that a lot of people really love. And it's got this amazingly simple pattern. It just starts, and you can give it numbers. So the pattern can be 1, then 7, then 6, then 5, then 4, then 3, then 4, then 5. And then the melody goes on top of that, which is, who will sing for the nightingale when the night is gone, when the daylight comes? And the second pattern is almost the same as the first. Who will sing for the nightingale when she sleeps alone in the sun? And then the second part of the tune does it almost exactly the same, but down a third. And so that would be starting on 6, then 5, and 4, and 3, 4, and 3, and 4, and 5. 6 and 5 and 4 and 3, 4, 5, 1. So there's all these simple patterns, and if people learn the pattern, they can be singing the song if they can remember the melody so quickly. And then if they want, they can be improvising to it without even really thinking about it, like I don't know what I'm playing with my right hand. And then, so that pattern was really helping people. And then I had come up with another name for a pattern that is at the end of a cadence. So at the end of each cadence, da da dee da da dee da 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 dee da 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 da. This really lovely. And I had a name for it, which was flirting. If I just said to people, well, you go up to the fourth and then down to the second and then up to the third, it would be hard to remember. But if I said, well, normally you'd play G and B because those are the 2 notes of the chord, but you're going to flirt with that top note. So I discovered that I was talking about patterns and it was making a huge difference for people. Just a completely different way of looking at music, and they're patterns that I've always known of, but didn't think to talk about. And at the same time, I realized there are patterns in my life that are equally, here with music, I'm trying to teach people how to inhabit and make these work. And what happens when people get it, they almost always say the same thing, which is, wow, what was so great is now I don't have to think, which means they can be really expressive.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the point. But I noticed with some of my patterns in life, I don't have to think. I can be infinitely creative with the concept of I'm not good enough.
Mm-hmm.
So when I said something like this, then you started talking about shame and how it shuts us down. So
Yeah.
I pass this back to you to unlock the next part of this.
Yeah, I've been in private practice for a long time. I'm not going to say how long, but for more than 1 or 2 decades. And at the end of that time, I I have seen over and over that what blocks people from living their true self more than anything is a sense of shame. And for me, Eric Erickson's developmental model of psychosocial stages fits here. Psychosocial meaning psychological state developed in social settings in relationship to other people. And he says that between the ages of 2 and 4, the psychosocial stage is autonomy versus shame. And autonomy in this case means self mastery and self agency, as we're talking about creativity and adult living. For 2 to 4 year olds, of course, autonomy means now they can climb out of the crib, they can walk on their own, that kind of thing. But what we're talking about in terms of creativity and living, breaking out of these patterns that you're talking about in other areas, is it really has to do with having a self and a sense of self agency and mastery, which means that we have consciousness of the different and opposing and conflicting energies and voices inside of us. And with that consciousness, we can influence and begin to move in a different direction by being in relationship to both sides, that which is helpful in us and that which is harmful. Most people try to pull up over or get rid of or dismiss or talk themselves out of ideas that aren't helpful. Well, it never works. Ultimately, it doesn't work, because the reality is that the only way that emotion of shame is going to get tempered is when you have some sense of self and your own value and worth that you can hold on to in a felt sense, that some part of you can feel simultaneously to this other part of you feeling the shame. They have to get in connection. And what you were doing with what you demonstrated, you did yesterday in Harp Time Live, is you were connecting two different sides. You were connecting the musicality to the technicality and the most basic of ways. And we sometimes think simple is simplistic in a negative way, but simple is essence. Simple is essence. And so what we also have to do with our shame is we have to distill it down and find the essence that's gotten cloaked up and distorted and hijacked by feeling bad and worthless.
So much is coming out as you're talking about this. I'll just work backward. Mm-hmm. First of all, I often think for myself, and I think I see it in members of the Academy and other people that I teach as well, is that the simple is not enough to hide me. And so
yeah.
Yesterday when I was teaching the Nightingale, and I've done this before, teaching that pattern, I was imagining that some people might be thinking, well, but that's not the whole thing. I mean, and I can't sing. And I was hearing their frustration, and I was understanding it. And I was thinking, that this is kind of the heart of what I teach in the Academy, which is that, we kind of come into music and we haven't, unfortunately, because music is written out, mm-hmm. we think that's the only way to play it. And we haven't, and unless we have grown up hearing people practice or hearing people compose or something like that, unless we've heard that, we do not know everything that leads up to that.
Right.
and therefore it appears to be shameful. And then if we have a relative, I was just thinking, I love my aunt so much, and I know she doesn't like the song "You Are My Sunshine." I don't know why she doesn't like it, but I love it so much. And when I was doing a concert for her and her friends, and I wanted to create something that people could sing.
Mhm.
And so I was singing it, and I kind of looked over at her, and I may have been projecting, but I think she was like, "Oh God." So you're embarrassing me. I don't really think that's what she was thinking.
Yeah.
I was probably projecting that, but we know this, and I know that I love the song, and so it didn't shut me down. But so many of the things that when I do have these feelings of shame, I completely shut down. And we've talked about this, about how I really struggle with showing up on social media, and show up and struggle with like being okay for me to be me, and what is me, and blah, blah, blah. And I was really struggling with that this week, because also anytime I do create something on social media and it seems to work, I shut down even more. It's just like I use everything to shut me down. But one of the things that I did this week, and I said to myself, I'm not going to talk about this because I'm superstitious that talking about it is going to send me back into fear.
Mm-hmm.
But I actually intentionally created a mediocre post. And I, here's what I'm thinking right now. And I just went to AI and it told me to make a mediocre post, and this is it. And it was really lovely, because I got many wonderful mediocre responses. I'm very happy. They were actually great responses. But so we were talking about the power of pattern and indoctrination and these patterns. And it's so interesting, because when you know the fundamentals of music, you can be infinitely creative with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when you know the fundamentals of any particular, thing that pushes you down, you can be infinitely creative with it.
Well, when you know the fundamentals of how the human psyche works, because there are things that we know and that have been known by the mystics and the alchemists throughout the ages. So there are natural laws, if we want to call them that, of how the human psyche operates. And that's part of Jung's theory. He says that his whole theory is based on observation. That he's not just making this up or pulling it out of the science lab, that he is seeing this repeatedly in the laboratory of human psyche and individual human beings. So I think that the other thing we have to know, just like you want to know the fundamentals of music, you want to know the fundamentals of how does human psyche work, which is part of what I offer in my online embodiment circle. And particularly in spirals 2 and 3, we start with essential embodiment practices to begin to build the psychic muscles to know how to relate to yourself and what's going on inside of you. Then we go into looking at 12 different embodiment processes that are the kinds of things we go through in order to find our true self. So I think knowing the fundamentals, again, the same thing is true like physically. If you've got a pain in the back, which my husband's been dealing with, if you have a sense of how the skeleton of the body operates and how how movement affects things, then you're going to be able to much more effectively intervene than if you don't have the fundamental template. So part of it, when we want to change something in ourself that's a relational pattern or a self-talk pattern, it's really helpful to understand and get some sound knowledge about how it is that we work. Because all shame, all guilt, all insecurity is rooted in experiences where that affect got activated, and we did not have the wherewithal in terms of consciousness, cognitiveness, sense of independence to be able to make meaning of what was going on. And so in the case of shame, we just end up assuming if someone frowns when we play a particular note, then it means we did something wrong, versus, oh, they just had gas. We don't think that, because at 2 or 3, we still we still have a sense primitive psyche that we're the center of the world. So I think that having some understanding of how we work is central.
Well, I want to ask about that, and then I want to.
Yeah.
Someone's asking me to take a little moment to play the Nightingale. So, and I can do that in a minute. I'm really interested, and what I wrote down is fundamental pattern versus affect. So one of the things I was curious right before you started speaking is I was like, but how do people see the pattern? How do they see the fundamental? Because I see that this is one of the biggest things that I'm teaching over and over and over again, is I'm teaching the components. I constantly saying, I'm going to teach you how music works. Now, I know that I'm looking from a specific standpoint. I have a harmonic, like, to me, the way the Nightingale works is da 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 da. That's the Nightingale to me. There could be any melody on top of that, any words on top of it. That and in fact, I think that's the same bass line to the Pachelbel canon. But to other people, that might be irrelevant, and I can't even play the melody. That might be what they're hearing. And then for other people, it might be the words. And for me, there's an overall structure that I see. And one of the things that I did yesterday, and what I'm teaching, and I'm teaching it at the Somerset Harp Festival. I'm actually doing a live all day where I break down the patterns and then show you all the different things you can do with it. Once you're breaking down the pattern, you see, okay, this is the fundamental tune. If you have to shorten it, this is how you do it. Here's how you can make a story out of it. Here's how you can, these are the other parts. Here's how you can make an instant ensemble with it. Here's how you can do this. So once you know that, you can start doing that. I am going to sing it for a minute just because I've asked.
Yeah.
But I also want to, and I'm just curious, I'm going to give you a challenge here, because I'm going to ask you to take this tune and apply what you're just talking about. Psychological. I have no idea if this could happen. I'm just curious. You talked about psychosocial. So this tune comes out of my relationship to my mother. And my relationship to my mother was extremely volatile. I mean, I left home when I was 16 because it was such a violent relationship. And at the same time, there was this in her voice was something changed my life and changed many people's lives. And so this song is about that thing. So I'm just going to sing just the heart of the song. Whoops. That was me falling over. So, you can hear the bass line here. And then there's this little motif. And you see that there. And then the song is, who will sing for the nightingale when the night is gone, when the daylight comes? Who will sing for the nightingale when she sleeps alone in the sun? Many's the time her silken tones soothed my rough and weary bones. Many's the time her lullaby took me to my rest. But who will sing for the nightingale? Her own sweet song is silent now. Who will sing for the nightingale when she sleeps alone in the sun? When she sleeps alone in the sun. So the question is, what is the song? And
Mhm.
and and what I'm realizing from yesterday's class and the classes that I'm creating for Somerset, and that people can get on my website, just teaching the song, that okay, there is so much to the song, and there is so much self-expression to the song, but the way in to the pattern, I think, is understanding this simple thing. And so I'm really curious, the simple baseline, because and then how it fits together, because that structures the tune. So I'm asking you, how do I do that with my psyche? I can teach it with my psyche, but with my music, but not with my psyche. And then I'm going to pull up some of these beautiful things we're getting.
Yeah. So if there is a wound, and I'm going to just use that word for a minute. I don't particularly, it's not my favorite word, but it's very popular in self-help books now. If your wound is a wound that occurs in relationship to another human being, it can only be healed in relationship to another human being. We can't do it on our own. So I think that having a healing relationship where that can be experienced as a historical event while having a present day relational felt sense that's different is part of how that healing happens. And the healing is organic. We can't make it happen. I kind of was glancing and saw Victoria's comment about, does it mean we can unshame ourselves by changing our way of experiencing shame, or is it more about a framework? Both, in some sense. From an analytic point of view, healing is an organic process. It's not anything we make happen. And there are a lot of popular theories out there that act as if ego can make it happen. But for me, very much, it is the unconscious, the larger self that we are, that is the essence of the life force itself in us that does the healing. And that's very Jungian. And as the ego can be in relationship to that totality of the self, then we kind of grease the wheels, so to speak. We invite healing. It's like the ego, instead of looking out here and holding on for dear life to whatever the collective says, starts to look within and hear the subtle nuances of what else is in us. What else is in us. So as the shame does get integrated, because it does over time get integrated as it begins to heal, then we don't shame so easily. But that doesn't mean there might not be some event in life at some point that triggers it. My own experience and the experience of people I work with is that the frequency of how often it gets triggered and the duration of how long you stay stuck in it is what really shifts. And then over time, the intensity of it. So it does begin to shift. So both our attitude towards shame, our being willing to engage with it and begin to locate it in historical experiences, does change our way of experiencing it. And it also is a new framework. Um, I want to say about your song and your sharing about having left home at 16, which maybe I knew that, but in this moment, right, you're sharing that and the violence of your relationship with your mother. And then the song to me is such an example of that archetypal reality of the good mother and the bad mother, that are the same mother. And I apologize for that language, good mother, bad mother, but unfortunately, that's how the psychoanalytic literature talks about it. The good
Yeah.
mother being the one who can care and respond in the way you're needed, which is the one you're longing for in the song. And then the bad mother, the one who does do violence and injustice to the child. And again, mother here can be broader to any caregiver. So yeah.
It's interesting that you're bringing that up. So much has.
Yeah.
First, God, I wanted to talk about balance, but you're talking about good mother, bad mother, and I'm there. One of the one woman shows that I created, which is called "Honey, I Shrunk the Harp," and it's about this this good mother, bad mother, which I think was it was in the Grimm's fairy tales, and it was also in
Oh, yeah.
yeah, and this idea that it has to be good or it has to be bad. And I remember that this person has to be good or they have to be bad. And I remember that, and then that comes on to who we are.
Right.
We're either good or we're bad. And then that ends up feeding into this whole thing. I was learning recently about the triangle. I can't remember what it is. Anyway, but I remember the day when I was walking on the bike path, and I was like, well, my mother was, I mean, like, she did these things to me. And then I was like, and she, you know, and she was this, and like, and literally there was like, but she's good, but she's bad, but she's good. And that one moment I was just like, yes, she was all that. You are going to, and it's interesting because I was thinking about the word balance, and I was thinking about the bike path, and I was thinking about when I learned to ride a bike, I felt, you know, always had skin knees because I was always falling off. And when we learn to ride a bike, we're learning balance. We don't learn to stay straight.
Right.
Learning to balance is learning to flexibly respond to all those things and to not be thrown by them anymore. And that when I was able to stand in that paradox and live in the paradox of my mother not being bad or good or whatever, and then I was able to really start singing that song, and then I was able to start, you know, singing it for myself and not just to try to heal that wound or be the opposite of that wound or whatever.
Yeah. Because it is a sign of psychological maturity when we realize we are a paradox.
Right.
And it all exists inside of us, and it exists inside of other people. Young children developmentally don't yet have that capacity. It's all black or white. It's extreme, and that again is part of the nature of any archetype. It's bipolar. Jung says it's got, you know, this extreme negative and this extreme light, but in truth, to be human, it all has to be mediated and come more toward the middle. So your realization of the balance, that just like riding the bike, it's about balancing. It's not perfect upright, but it's a little this way. That is when we get it, that all these various parts of ourselves that are sometimes very opposing and very conflictual, when we can find that balance, that center point within, then we can move forward. You know, and so this is where, again, to go back for a minute to Victoria's question. So then it's like if the shame comes up, we're quickly able to rebalance.
Right.
It's like, you know, I always have what I call a backlash. Everything I do something new in public, like taking a big step forward to put myself more out there, I will always then have some backlash of negative feeling. And you know what? Now when it shows up, I'm like, oh, hey there. Of course you're here. You always show up, you know? And it doesn't have the power over me anymore because I know it's part of my history, and none of us can change our history. We can change our relationship to our history, but we can't change our history.
Thank you. So
Yeah.
I'm going to pull up. I'm just going to pull up just so you guys know that we're seeing you. So thank you. It's interesting how To Life to Music is saying hearing this song helps me release negative emotions all the time. It helps my body feel better. And I want to say that, you know, one of the things as people are learning to play music, I think they often feel like, well, I'm not good enough to be able to have this response for people. And my belief is that it is because if we play with that shame, I remember talking to so I had teacher Tony, who anyway, and he was saying, you know, what people are there to see, blah blah. There's lots of things. What I want to say is that I was talking to his wife, who also studied with him, and who's also a performer, and we were talking about how we get up on stage and we think people are seeing what we want to show them, but that's not what they're seeing at all. They're seeing all the other stuff. They're seeing the discomfort. They're seeing our anxiety. And so I am constantly, you know, hoping, and there's breakthroughs all the time in the Academy where people are realizing it's not about how many notes I'm playing, and it's not even if I can sing this song, but if I can find my way, like, who will sing for the nightingale? Like, if you can't sing, you speak. If you can, you know, whatever it is, but it. I don't know. I don't know what I'm saying. You probably know what I'm saying.
Well, I, you know, I, I'll tell you a thought I've had two or three times as you've been talking, so I'm just going to bring it in, even if it seems unrelated. Sometime in the last week, my husband and I were in a car and we were listening to an old time CD of an old time fiddler and a lap dulcimer player. And this lap dulcimer play, oh my God, I've never heard that kind of music come out of a lap dulcimer. And John was saying she was the music. She was
Right.
the music. And so that when we get it, we are the music. But if we're caught in feeling bad, less than, I don't know enough technicality, and I suffer from that at the heart. I mean, I shared a couple of weeks ago, I had an experience where that just left the room, and there was this beautiful moment of expression that touched the person I was playing with, touched me, touched my husband who was in another room listening. And there wasn't any self-consciousness because shame also activates self-consciousness because it brings in the assessor to try to make sure we don't behave in a way that someone else is going to shut us down, tell us how wrong we are, or respond hostilely. So to be the music that we are, and my sense is when you wrote The Nightingale, you were expressing the music of all of the complexity of who you are, and also that in relationship to your mother.
And for years, I refused to sing it because the tune seemed so simple to me
Right.
that I could not see the value of it at all. I thought
And
it showed what a simplistic mind I had, and therefore was not a good composer.
but the simplicity is the distilled essence, the numinosum.
You know I love that word. You know I'm always going to love it. I'm going to pull up this. So Donald is saying, it's fascinating how our experiences can vary so wildly based on how our experiences have trained our neural pathways, and how our own confirmation bias can keep strengthening those pathways. Right, the power of pattern.
Yes.
So at the one time, we were talking a moment ago about patterns where we're stuck and patterns that are opening us up. And we were also talking earlier when we were off screen about how so many people get in assessment as a pattern itself. And what a quick antidote, or I found that my biggest key for that is to simply find something to love. And that somehow finding something to love takes me out of the pattern and into the experience. And this morning I was running and I was off into my head about my running and comparing and stuff like that. And took a moment to be like, okay, come on, Deborah, come on, find something to love. And I just felt the breath in my lungs, and it just completely changed the experience. And part of me is like, well, if it's that simple, it can't be good. But it is. And
It is.
I also want to pull up the next thing that Donald said, unless you wanted to speak to this.
No, let's go ahead to the next one.
Okay. I think it's important to recognize this, how our own confirmation bias can keep strengthening those pathways. I think it's important to recognize this, but also to accept ourselves as this is the path that had brought us to where we are. And we are now, they are now it's part of our authentic self. Right. And I love that, because that gives me another thing to always fall back on. Like, no matter what, I can always be like, okay, and I appreciate and am grateful for whatever it is that brought me to here.
Yeah, and in truth, the psyche, the primitive psyche, meaning the unconscious psyche, makes a lot of choices for us that we cognitively are never aware of because they're made those first 5 years of life in order to help keep us alive and keep the sense of self we are alive. It's just sometimes those things don't help us as adults anymore. But to really be able to honor and value how they served you at the time they came into development is important.
Well, this is so interesting because it helps me see how learning the power of pattern, like learning the pattern of the nightingale, can actually dismantle other patterns. As you were saying that, I was thinking, if you can concentrate on the fact that the whole thing just has this downward motion that then resolves, maybe you can undermine the pattern of like, oh, I can't remember melodies. What if I forget that? Oh, I can't do those two things. All the other patterns that are, that kind of stuff.
Well, the other key to remembering patterns is the energetic or emotional charge. We remember the patterns that are imprinted in our psyche are imprinted because of a strong emotional or affect being emotion and body innervation or body activation response. So I think this is the other piece. You can talk about patterns and you can teach patterns, but the key to anybody really getting the pattern or the pattern getting them is it being tied to a strong emotional response, an affective response.
Okay, so I'm going to bring up Victoria's comment, and then what I really want to ask you, okay, how do you do that? But let's see. I just want to see.
Well, let me just say real quickly, how you do it is you set it up for me right before you play the Nightingale by sharing your struggle with your mother, and this song is a response to that. That immediately evoked the emotion in me. And now I've heard you play that pattern forever, but I got it. Now I could sit down at the harp and do it. But it's the affect. You set it up by being authentic about what the song meant to you.
And how did that help you learn the pattern, though?
Because the affect imprints God. We're getting. I'm kind of floundering because there are many pieces here that I can't really explain in 5 minutes. It has to do with how psyche imprints information. It has to do with how psyche imprints.
And this is so interesting because I heard you say imprint, and suddenly I saw like, oh my God, you're right. In print, you don't see the real patterns.
Or you see them after they're imprinted because then you know them experientially.
Man, I'm going to have to go back and think about printed music and imprinting. So, all right, and maybe this will be next week's is imprint. Next week we're talking about freedom because it's the 4th of July. Okay, Victoria's saying, I think we are conditioned to think that the more complicated something is, the more important or valuable it is. Yes, and I've had conversations with AI about this, by the way, because it keeps making more and more complicated answers if the first thing doesn't work. And I always have to say to it, stop it. Give me the most simple answer. And I've had conversations with it where I've said, why do you think that is your go-to? And then I've answered myself by saying, gee, who created you, AI? And why did they create you in such a way as to make, more and more complicated answers if the first one isn't working? But anyway, more on that another time. So Victoria, we are conditioned. So there's some kind of imprint there to think that the more, I just realized why. Because we think, I don't know if this is true, but I was just thinking, right, because we have a baby way of doing things, and we think that baby way we're going to have to grow it up. And so he's saying the more complicated it is, the more important or valuable it is. And right, as kids, the thing we understand is not the grown-up thing. And so it always seems like, the complicated way of doing it. And Victoria says some of the best things are simpler. I don't know what exactly that is, but I like it. Simple or simpler. And mastering simplicity is actually very hard. Right. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I'm teaching over and over again in the academy, because I keep hearing when people get it, they're like, simple is beautiful. And I have it that simple can support expansion and embellishment. But expansion and embellishment doesn't naturally support simple necessarily.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm thinking maybe we can start a revolution to have a different word. That maybe simpler, in the sense we're talking about, it really needs to be the elemental or the essential.
Right.
Because that, in the first spiral of the embodiment circle, it is essential embodiment practices, and they're very simple things that people tend not to do on their own. To set aside for 28 days doing a body scan for 30 minutes a day, it's like, oh, well, I know what's going on in my body. People dismiss it. But the power of doing that very simple, essential, elemental building of relationship to self. Um,
Mm.
and so I, the things that are essential are the things that matter. They're the things that have heart. They're the things that, again, are going to evoke that emotional, affective, felt sense, where then we have it. It has us and we have it.
I'm just thinking about something my team was doing last night. We were trying to come up with some simple guidelines to help us when we look at web pages to see if they're effective and whatever. And we were anyway, and we were thinking, like, how can we find something that is as effective and simple as who, what, when, where, how, and why?
Yeah.
It's such a simple thing, and yet it allows us to create some kind of groundedness on which I would say, on which self-expression can grow, almost like it's, if your self-expression were a beautiful vine, if it doesn't have something to grow on, it just like kind of jumbles up and grows on itself. But if there is this framework or foundation, and so I feel like I'm constantly teaching these two things, foundational ideas, like you said, and frameworks to support them.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but the goal, and when I see people do this in the academy, and I see it more and more, the goal is that somebody comes up with whatever it is that they are out to express. Often they don't know what it is even.
Right.
But then when we start seeing, every time I see someone shine through, I'm like, this is what I was waiting for in life.
Mm-hmm.
This was the performance I wanted to see.
Yeah.
Not somebody do something perfectly whatever, but you shining through.
Yeah. So I wanted, before we have to stop and kind of segueing with what you're saying, to talk about the throwing off the shame part.
Yeah.
I think the throwing off happens by being in relationship with yourself in that state and holding on to yourself in the present. And the second thing I want to say is taking an action. So that the action may be something like breathing. I practiced over the weekend. My meditation one morning was playing some tunes that I know really well and practicing bottle breathing. And my focus was to, breathing where your abdomen is like the bottom of the round bottle or flask and everything else. And that stays full the longest, so that, the air comes in and that's full, then it fills up and then it goes out from the bottom down. Anyway, I was playing with that and playing tunes that I knew well, so I didn't have to worry about the chords. And hearing the difference in the sound, and it was tangible. I mean, I could feel the difference in my body when I just focused on being with the experience of breathing and being with the tune, versus not thinking about breathing and worrying about, was I getting it right? So action is part of how we get out of shame, and it can be a simple step. And your step of on your run this morning of saying, okay, but wait a minute, what do I love here?
Mm-hmm.
That's an action. So when you feel that toxic shame coming, find the simplest of actions you can take. And maybe it's to, again, say, what's the one thing I love right now? Okay, I love the fact that I'm standing. I can stand up. Maybe that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Or, find that one thing that you can focus on to get yourself out of the head diatribe that's shaming you. And that can be the breath.
I love how, as you were talking about breath and you were talking about the in and the out, and I was like, oh, right. So when we are focusing on the baseline of a piece and we're just focusing on
That's the fullness
thing,
Yeah.
then it actually frees our our presence,
Right.
and how and us actually being there.
Right.
And then that opens up our self-expression.
Right. That's right. Well, I'm also thinking, again, you're starting with the fullness of the belly, and the belly in most spiritual traditions, that's where the hara, that is the kind of the center, is that area of the body that's associated with connection with the divine essence. So the base is that fullness of the alchemical flask. And the body, because the body is an alchemical flask. I love it.
So
I'm
it's
going to hold that image this week. That's part of what I'm going to hold
okay,
when
and
I'm playing.
yeah, and I'm going to really think about, so, Victoria's saying mastering simplicity is actually very hard. And what I'm going to do is think about not mastering it, but
Yes.
actually, like opening it to that, because it's part of my child self, and opening to that and see what happens when I do that. So thank you, everyone. One of the things we love about this is it's a conversation, and it's a conversation with you. And just
Mhm.
thank you for everyone who shared. And it's wonderful to see you. And for those who are watching afterwards, come back live. Come back. We are now on podcasts. We're now on Apple Podcasts. We're now in a bunch of different places. You can always find them through Jung at Harp. That's Jung, Jung at Harp. HARP, and not young at heart. It's thank you so much. And thank you, Kathleen. We will be here again next week, and we'll look forward to seeing all of you.